All right. As we get set up here, good afternoon to all the participants that'll be joining us, the one that has joined us already. And obviously, as we kind of journey through our afternoon session here, we will be expecting a few more people. So, nonetheless, today we will have the Youth Connect session from 12 to 1. It'll be a full 1 hour, and we're advised not to go overtime. So we will have the full intentional hour to connect with our guest speaker today. So my name is Al Crawford. I come to you originally from the Big Stone Cree Nation, but now make my home in Edmonton, Alberta. It's very chilly in the province of Alberta and all over the place. We just experienced a lot of snow. Coming down with a little bit of a sinus cold, so I'm really trying to get over that. But nonetheless, I'm really honored and always thankful to Candu for inviting me in really last minute fashion. Just kidding. It's always nice to collaborate, and it's always nice to be featured in the Youth Connects, and also I've been a part of the Links to Learning as well. So kind of getting familiar with some of the programs and things that are offered through Candu. And so I'm just really honored to welcome our guest as well. Today we'll be hearing from Reanna Merasty. And so in the past, we've heard from Don and Janie with the Starbucks Foundation, as well as Michelle Nevadomi. So a little bit of housekeeping for this afternoon. If you're wanting to speak, you can use the raise hand function. Grab some water, and if you're really dehydrated, grab some Pepsi. Yeah, get extra hydrated there. And then obviously a notepad, or you're more than welcome to take notes on your whatever device you're using. So we do encourage that you take notes. Really helps retain some of the information that'll be shared. As always, there will be $100 gift card after doing the evaluation, which will be sent out after the session. We encourage everyone to fill that out, as it does help us, especially take feedback. And for future Youth Connect sessions, it's always really valuable that we have feedback and input from some of our attendees. So with that, I will introduce our speaker here this afternoon. And with that, we'll get right into our Youth Connect session. So Reanna Merasty is a Nihithaw from Barren Lands First Nation, an architectural intern and Indigenous design co-lead at Number 10 Architectural Group, based in Treaty 1 territory. She holds a Master of Architecture and a Bachelor of Environmental Design from the University of Manitoba. Her work amplifies Indigenous voices, fosters community engagement, promotes land-based pedagogies, and enhances representation in architecture. Rihanna is a strong advocate and dedicated community volunteer, serving on numerous boards, both locally and nationally, including the UM Board of Governors as Manitoba Regional Director, on the board of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, member of the Order of Manitoba Advisory Council with the Province of Manitoba and the Board of Inspire, an Indigenous national charity. During her time at the Rihanna co-founded the Indigenous Design and Planning Students Association. After experiencing a lack of Indigenous inclusion, her advocacy has been recognized with the Inspire Youth First Nations Award, considered the highest honor Indigenous people bestow upon their own people. So Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal for Community Service as well. And last but not least, the CBC Manitoba Future 40 Award. Um, really healthy, lengthy bio here, but very well versed, very educated, and obviously has done some very important advocacy and representation work. And most of all, Rihanna is a proud wife and mother to twin boys, Gray and Kane. So with that, I will hand it over to you there, Rihanna. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to all the information that you'll share. So once again, if you'd like to speak or have a question that you'd like to ask Rihanna later on, we will have time for Q&A as well. For now, we'll get right into the session. So take it away when you're ready there, Rihanna. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, and can do for the invitation. So tense sipikosyo naskani esqueo na disnakasan kisipakamak netosin. As mentioned, my name is Reanna Merasty. and I am a person in architecture, and I've been in the field for about 10 years. 10 years ago is when I started my education, and it'll be actually this year is when I get become a registered architect. I'm just submitting my application um, to register for next week, and so that's very exciting. But I just figured out this feature. Look at that. Look at there. But as mentioned, I am a mother, I'm a wife. My twins are about almost 11 months old now, and they will be my co-presenters today. They do a lot of screaming, so you might hear them in the back, but I've had them just playing around with each other. And so if you hear any noise, that's probably because of them. They might make an appearance if something happens. But as mentioned, thank you so much to Candu for the invitation. I first got introduced to Candu when I was part of their national youth panel, I think about 2 or 3 years ago. And so that's my first intro to this great organization and what they do for our youth. So today I will be speaking about um, we have the title that I gave this presentation is We Have Always Known Architecture. And so I will go a little bit about into how I personally got into architecture, how my own community influenced my path, and a lot of the work that we do within the field of Indigenous architecture. So I'll go into education, how to be an architect, definition of Indigenous architecture, and all of the work that I had the privilege of being a part of when both in school and also professionally. So I'm from what is traditionally known as Kisipigamak, which translates to where the water ends. And it is on the north shore of Reindeer Lake in northern Manitoba. Um, and it is signatory to Treaty 10 because you have to get into the community through Saskatchewan. And so this, my community has always been a part of me. It's always been my understanding of home and water and living off the land. But it is ultimately the reason why I got into architecture. And so I'll explain that in a little bit. Home is where I was raised by my kugum and my mushum. I actually call my mushum Papa. And they are there in the middle of this image. And for pretty much my entire childhood, I would spend my summers with them on Reindeer Lake, on our own island, and in the cabins that my grandpa built. We do a lot of hunting, trapping, fishing, and even log cabin building. And it was my first introduction to appreciating the land and the earth that surrounds us. And this this experience is really hits close to home because they are seen as one of the most important people in my life. And my actually the Kugum that you see in the middle passed away, unfortunately, last month. Um, and so she had an opportunity to meet my boys, and I was able to tell her how much she meant to me and in all the work that I do. And so I try to honor her in everything that I do or talk about. When I was home, my grandpa was going through all of his stuff, thinking of stuff that we could take that was my kugum's in one of her bedrooms. And he pulled out this photo on the left, and he showed me that that was the first log cabin that he ever built by himself. And I believe, I'm not sure who that person is in the photo, but he did that by himself with his father and documented it. And then the image on the right is his most recent log cabin that he built, and that is on our island on Reindeer Lake. And he built these with his own two hands. No machinery, no fancy equipment, just him and the labor and the hard work that it goes into these buildings. And that is something that I really appreciate. And when I was younger, I would actually help him. I would help him get logs. He would take the boat and go to another island and haul them, and I would help carry them and take off the bark and just watch him build these buildings from the ground up. And so from that experience, I originally wanted to be a carpenter because I really loved woodworking. And from there, I got introduced to architecture because I enrolled into a drafting class in high school, and where I got to work with a lot of like woodworking machinery, and I was starting to build stuff. I was starting to build furniture. And then in that moment, I wanted to be a carpenter. And also in that class, we were able to build little models of houses. And from there, I got introduced to architecture. And that was when I was about 10 in grade 10. And that was over 10 years ago that I made this promise to myself that this is something that I wanted to do, and I never strayed away from it. And as mentioned, I will officially be a licensed architect within the next month, which is very exciting because this goal has been a long time coming. And so to explain a little bit about what an architect does, an architect is professionally trained and licensed to plan, design spaces, and oversee the construction of buildings. In terms of Indigenous architects, there is very minimal members of this community. I think there's just over 30 in all of Canada. And I'm very privileged to soon to be part of that community. So as I mentioned, this process started a little over 10 years ago. I enrolled into my Bachelor's of Environmental Design in 2016 and my Master's of Architecture in 2019. And I then started my internship in 2021. And so these are the different phases that it takes to become a licensed architect. You first need that education, which entails a bachelor's and a master's degree. You need experience with a provincial association. So in my case, it was with the Manitoba Association of Architects, and you enroll into an internship in architecture program with a certain firm. This could take anywhere from as quick as 2 years if you wanted it to be, but mine took 5 years because I wanted to do a lot of advocacy work on the side. And so I decided to take my time. And then you take an examination for architects in Canada. This entails 4 exams that you take over the span of 2 days that could cover a range of different topics. I recently found out that I passed them. So in 2024, I took all four. I was pregnant then with twins in the first trimester, studying for 4 exams. But I actually ended up failing one of them. And so just this past November, I took that one exam and then I found out that I passed it. And so I am on the last step currently in where I'll be registering with the provincial association, aka the Manitoba Association of Architects, which is technically the last step in this really big journey. And so this is just a little bit about how this process looks like. And it actually happened way more faster than I thought it was going to be. But now, what is architecture? What do we do? And so architecture, in the simplest terms, is the art or practice of designing and constructing buildings. It blends art and science to create spaces where people live, work, play, learn, pray, meet, govern, shop, or travel. And architecture is the buildings that we are currently in that shelters us from the outside environment. It is our homes and anything that protects us from either heat, cold, wind, or rain. But in my experience, it's also widely colonial. Sometimes when you think of architecture as First Nations people, we think of residential schools, we think of those old brick buildings in some of the city centers. And that was really besides my experience within my home community, that was my first experience of modern architecture in the city where it doesn't represent our people, it doesn't represent our stories or our histories. And so I started to do a lot of research when I was in school, where I first got introduced to other Indigenous architects that are really working towards including our Indigenous communities. And so I researched first Patrick Stewart, who is a Niska architect in British Columbia, and he's actually now a friend, a mentor, and a colleague. And he completed his dissertation in Indigenous education, I believe, and it was titled Indigenous Architecture Through Indigenous Knowledge. And I gained exposure to it due to breaking the norms of colonial academic writing and was written without periods or epicases. And a lot of the stuff within this PhD dissertation was interviews with Indigenous architects. And one of the things that really drew me to this was that actually this diagram explaining the areas of Indigenous knowledge. And then among those 4 areas is actually architecture, is one of them, as being one of the things that identify us as Indigenous people. And then also there is these principles at the bottom that encompass all of Indigenous knowledge, which is respect, relationships, relevance, reflection, reciprocity, redistribution, and also responsibility. And so when I look at the definition of Indigenous architecture, I look at this. You can also look to our communities and what they traditionally did for their buildings. And so I always say that we have always been builders, makers, innovators, engineers, and architects. And so traditionally, architecture was of this land. It was purposeful and built by Indigenous people. In Ontario, we see the longhouse. On the West Coast, we see the Haida house. On the East Coast, we see the wigwam. In the North, we see the igloo or the tupik. And in the plains, we see the teepee. Grayson. Each of these buildings are representative of the place and the people who built them. They embody the teachings of that place and of this nation. And I consider the log cabin that sits on my family island on Reindeer Lake a piece of traditional architecture because it is of that place and of the people that built it. So if we change the definition of architecture to be Indigenous architecture, we now know that it blends not only art and science, but it also blends Indigenous knowledge. And it creates spaces for the things that are unique to us, such as for dance, for feast, connect with the land and gathering and ceremony. And we are designing with and for Indigenous communities. And for myself, it is an opportunity to create meaningful relationships and to use our teachings to influence how we build and design. So in terms of modern Indigenous architecture, what are we doing today? How are we adapting the things that we have and traditionally have within our communities to create something that are of this year? And these are some examples of that. And so, as I mentioned, there's this very small community of Indigenous architects creating things with Indigenous knowledge and really paving the way for our future. They were role models and now mentors in this field for me. And the ones that really inspired me are actually have examples on this page. The first one is Douglas Cardinal. He was actually the first Indigenous architect in all of Canada, and he created the Cree Cultural Institute that is on the top left here. In the middle top is Ryan Gorey, who is an old boss of mine. And so I learned a lot from him, and he created the Thunder Bay waterfront. The one in the top right is a lady of smoke who owns Smoke Architecture and is a really powerful First Nations woman in architecture. The bottom left is Chris Cornelius, who actually is from the States, but creates these beautiful art pieces throughout all of the universities there. Or even Jake Jacassim within the middle, and also Alfred Waugh on the bottom right with his First Nations pavilion. But there's also many others that, like, such as David Fortin, Sean Bailey, Jason Sirkan, Rochelle Lemieux, and many others that are currently my friends. And so this is what I see and use as influence in all my projects. And so now, how has this influenced my own work in the field? So once I first got introduced to all of these Indigenous architects, I wanted to practice it for myself in my education. And so in university, we have these things called studios where we practice and design something that is unique or has a theme that is provided by your professor. And so these are some examples where I try to include Indigenous knowledge in some of my work. The first one was actually a powwow arbor. And so I tried to create a powwow arbor that was mimicked a piece of like a plant that I found in the community. And it was this beautiful plant that spiraled around another plant. And that made me think about how the dance has a movement, our drums have a movement, and our people have a movement. And so I wanted something that really flowed and went clockwise to explain how a powwow arbor works. And I did these little drawings and models on the top right. And then at the top, there is actually a physical model that's probably about 1.5 feet wide that I made myself. And I thought that was one of the best things that I was able to create. And then the bottom left was a land-based cultural center for youth that are currently in care, and it was to be part of the land. And I used traditional raw elk hide to create the model. And then the bottom two there are actually for an Indigenous education resource center that had a community room, educational resources, financial resources, an apartment complex, and a daycare to support Indigenous students that are in education. And so what's really unique about all of this is that these projects were what I thought our community needed, and are stuff that I still have a passion for today. But also subsequently, when I was exploring this work of Indigenous architecture in my education, I also wanted to make sure that I was using my voice properly to advocate for this very small community of Indigenous designers in architecture. And so when I first started that, I found a need in using my voice to advocate for it. When I transitioned from my bachelor's to my master's program, I had this chance to either go to a university that already had Indigenous curriculum within it, or I could stay at the University of Manitoba and try to change it for myself. And I ended up making the decision to stay at the University of Manitoba. And I ended up co-founding the Indigenous Design and Planning Student Association, which still is there to this day. And from there, we developed events with the Canadian Architecture Forums on Education. We developed a book called Voices of the Land, Indigenous Design and Planning from the Prairies, because we couldn't find books that we had for ourselves. And develop calls to action. And they even had a elder in residence that were able to assist architecture students within within their studios. And then outside of the university, I had the opportunity to sit with the Canadian Centre for Architecture, and go to a program and work with the Sami people of Norway, Finland, and Sweden in Europe. And the bottom right image is us at the Sami University College in Kautokeino, Norway, where we got to look at their own version of traditional architecture, but also working with that stuff like the city of Winnipeg, and also presentations for different areas, for educators, for business people, for children on representation of Indigenous architecture as well. So I've had the privilege of being part of all of these spaces, and just like this one today. So in terms of professionally, based on so when I graduated university and I started my internship, I, I've had about a lot of years to really understand what the purpose of an architect does. And so there are different phases that happen throughout an architectural project. It starts with conceptual design and schematic design, design development, construction documents, it's a baby. Just one second. Here, and then construction bidding, and then construction administration. And so each of these different phases have different tasks associated with them. For example, the conceptual design, you do a lot of research, you look into the site of where the building is going to be built, and you start doing program is what it's called. And a program is all of the things that will be included in the building. For example, if it's an apartment building, you look at how many rooms that are associated with, how many studios, how many 3 bedrooms, et cetera, et cetera. If you look at a school, you look at how many classrooms are needed based on the population, based on the teachers and educators that are there, and you do a lot of talking with communities. And then schematic design and design development is just going back and forth on drawings, sketches, 3D models of the design that you're proposing. Construction documents is all of the fine details and technical drawings that are associated with the building. And then construction building and construction administration is you overseeing all of the things associated with it being built. So you work with a lot of contractors and all of that stuff to try to verify and make sure that all of your work is where it should be. And so it very depends on where a project is and what you're doing. But that's why I really love architecture, because because based on the project, you could be doing something different every single day, and it really keeps it interesting. Another thing that I love about architecture is that it's actually very community centered. And so I've been able to have the privilege to host a lot of what we call engagement sessions with communities on all of these different buildings that we've been able to do. And we try to make sure that community is consulted, engaged, and informed throughout the entirety of the process. And we do that through these meetings and these gatherings. And these are some examples on the screen of some of those events that we were able to host. And we try to make sure that it's as comfortable as possible with stuff that are very familiar to Indigenous people, such as feasting and ceremony and smudging, and making sure that it's continuous along the way and not just a one-time conversation with Indigenous people. And so, what has this looked like in terms of my professional work? One of the first examples of my work happened actually when I was a student, and this was one of my first built like structures or projects or art pieces, and it is titled the Rainbow Butterfly Warming Hut. And it was developed with Manitoba Moon Voices and is a warming hut to honor MMIWG and 2S Plus and their families. The warming hut is structured on 3 platforms that represent the girl, the woman, and the grandmother. And the structure and the material used was actually inspired by a butterfly. If you look at a butterfly wing on a microscope, you see these little scalloped little edges, and we use that as inspiration of how the outside of the structure would be used. And so, and then also the middle has this beautiful film that represents the rainbow, that represents its name, that was actually given to them in ceremony. And still to this day, this is placed within somewhere in the city and is used for ceremonies and to honor MMIWG and 2S Plus people. Another thing that I got to work on is the Kikinau Elders Lodge. in Victor Lake, Alberta. It is on the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, and through engagement, we heard that the mountains are an important part of the identity of the community, which led to the formation of the circle to ensure all views to the surrounding mountains for each elder. It is a facility of 12 units for 12 different elders within the community. And it was a very unique project because usually within this community, elders had to leave their community to receive the care that they needed. And this was the first instance of them receiving it within their community and traditionally and be able to have access to all of their traditional needs. And the image on the left is actually a drawing that I made identifying all the different spaces that were needed within that facility. So it shows the semicircle of the 12 units. It shows a central gathering place that was identified as the home fire and all of the different supports and needs that a traditional building would have, such as a dining room, administration offices, support, a kitchen, and amenity spaces is what we call it, which is basically a multi-purpose room for them to practice things, with also a traditional smokehouse within the back. This is the Kikinau Elders Lodge and what we designed. What they wanted a building that resembled their own territory, and they want it centered around a teepee structure that we labeled as the home fire. And this teepee structure, they wanted that be the highest in the building to represent its importance. And they also wanted beadwork display throughout the facility that was inspired by various family beadwork patterns in the community. And I had the privilege of drawing these because I'm also an artist. And so I had the opportunity to research all of these family beadwork patterns and incorporate them in different areas, such as through the entrance window, this metal panel, and then also in the back of the building where they were going to have the smokehouse. It is actually one of the very first buildings that I actually is almost finished that I got to work from the very beginning. I started it 5 years ago when I first started my internship, and it is going to have a grand opening soon. And this is actually an image of it built today. And you can see the beadwork patterns on the window and that central courtyard within it. But this is the entrance for that building. Another thing that I had the privilege of working on is actually here in Winnipeg, and it's the redevelopment of the Hudson's Bay building in downtown Winnipeg with Southern Chiefs Organization. The title of the project is Wewene Bagakanagan, which is means it is visible in Anishinaabe. The facility includes residential living, daycare, and other community spaces. It is to represent Southern First Nations of Anishinaabe and Dakota, and the space to be warm, welcoming, and inspiring to not just Indigenous peoples. The project is actually about 600,000 square feet, and this atrium that you see here is actually something that they needed to demolish. They need to demolish all of the floors just to make this atrium to provide a lot of natural light into all of the units and the atrium space. The project is a symbol of reclamation and representation in action, as the Hudson's Bay building was built in the 1920s. And this act of reclamation is unique because of the relationship historically that Hudson's Bay Company has with First Nations people. It is inspired by traditional construction, and the interior atrium features a lot of natural tones and what we call these ribs on the sides of the wall. And so you see these ribs going all the way from these columns all the way to the top and connecting to the structure on the roof. And these are what we call ribs. And it's in symbolic because these ribs that are creating this really unique form within the building holds the heart of the building, which is this central atrium. Then there's also an opportunity to incorporate stories of the First Nations that are part of Southern Chiefs organization on it as well. This is an example of a floor plan that was developed that represents the residential floors on one of the floors for the apartments that are going to be here. And it showcases all of the different variations and basically how big this facility is going to be. You have units facing the exterior, which is the outside, but also the interior atrium in the middle, all receiving beautiful natural light because this building had a lot of character to it and these beautiful large windows as well. And then also on these floors are these little purple spaces, which are actually community spaces. You have access to smudging for each of these units as well. Oh my God, they're laughing. And so one thing that I really love about this project also is that Southern Chiefs Organization really tries to make sure that the process, everyone knows of the process. So if you go on their website, you can go see a 360 view of that interior atrium as it's being demolished and constructed at the same time. And so you see this beautiful image and how basically how big this space is going to be. And we always correlated the size of this atrium as being the size of an NHL hockey rink. And the floors from floor to ceiling will be about 12 feet high as well. And so was a very hard building to plan and locate stuff, but it's also very rewarding when you see the progress like this. Um, they are almost in the process of installing several other things. And just last year, they removed their last piece of concrete within the middle through this crane, which was a long time coming. And so now we get to do all the fun stuff, which is implementing all the different finishes and making it look very beautiful. And it's expected to be completed in 2028. And I really highly recommend if you want to see more of these images to just go to their SCO's website and to see that. But all of these projects are ones that I've almost completed, but there's several other ones that I've got the privilege of working on, such as I'm working on a hockey arena in Wishishkanigam Nation in Ontario. Um, I'm working on office buildings for Nawi Odina, which is the former Kapiong Barracks site that is owned now by Treaty One Development Corporation. And also within there is different retail spaces. My colleague is building apartment buildings there as well. And then several other just smaller projects that are for the North End in our community. Actually, one that is also finished, but I've not been able to get pictures of it because it's such a sensitive organization because of the people that occupy it. But it's for Mount Carmel Clinic and it's a community wellness hub. And it's for their programming for folks that reside on the street and also women that are in survival also on the street. And so I had the opportunity of developing one of their buildings and I believe it just finished as well. And so I haven't been able to see it, as I mentioned, because of the people that occupy it for their safety and privacy. But those are just some examples of some of the projects that I had the privilege of working on. That is it for some of my slides. I thank you for tuning in and I welcome any questions that I can answer. And my babies hopefully did not make a lot of noise.
Right on. Yeah, no, actually we couldn't at least I can't hear any babies yelling around or anything on my end, but yeah, so I guess we'll open the floor for some questions. Don't be shy. If you are super shy, you can ask in the chat box or you can turn on your camera or your audio and ask that way as well. And if not, I can kind of break the ice a little bit. I know that I really appreciated the presentation. So, any questions? If not, I have a few of my own I'd like to ask. And yeah, well, go ahead there, Amber.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the presentation. It was very educational and very good job. Well done. I apologize for joining partway through, so I didn't see the full presentation. From what I've seen and heard, um, I kind of missed the part of like for your elder care lodge. What are some different funding programs that you have accessed, and do you have grant writers that First Nation communities can access to help us write? Because our First Nations do experience the lack of capacity in some areas, so. We do need to identify these areas. And if there's lots of help, and I know there's lots of help, just being educational aware of where we can get these resources. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Um, So a lot of the time, for in that case of the Elders Lodge, they sought out a project management company to that first did what they called like a feasibility study. And so that's the initial project of how much just ballpoint of how much money you need, what is needed, how much square feet, and all that stuff. And then from there, they reach out to designers, and then that project management company is able to help with a lot of funding resources. Sometimes we, as designers and in the architecture field, we can help that do that as well. I personally am not in that type of space. But a lot of my partners and bosses are as well. The only thing that I have knowledge of is there's a lot of Canada Green Building Council, and so there's a lot of projects that need to focus on sustainability in order to be funded. And so that's something that a lot of people are turning to as well because it has a lot of Indigenous community focus and it prioritizes Indigenous communities. Um, and then also a lot of like government grants with such as like CMHC, which is also something that I have experience of. So it is a range, but the people that do have knowledge are a lot of project management companies. They used Collier's project leaders to assist them in finding the funding for the Elders Lodge.
Awesome. Any other questions? We still have roughly 17 minutes, so that does leave a little bit of time for Q&A before you wrap up. And if there's no, I guess, immediate questions from our participants, I guess I'll ask just to pick at your brain a little bit. So I know like it really sparked interest because when you I guess we don't think about it that way that we've always been architects in our own right. And obviously we had to come up with ways for lodging, for shelter. Even I'm sure there could be a lot of architectural sciences that go into things like our sweat lodges and things like that too. As I look to your background, you obviously live in a beautiful home. Was that something that kind of inspired you as well? Were you aside from like our traditional forms of housing, was it something that like even in modern times that really inspired you to take on that path of architectural design and stuff like that as well? So is that something that you're kind of always been a big fan of, or is it something like you started with more traditional architecture in our communities and then it kind of branched into like modern architecture? So that'd be my question, kind of yeah, pulling from both, I guess, and what your views are.
Yeah. So actually it actually did start with housing, but not like to this extent of the house that I live in now. It actually started with trying to advocate for First Nations housing. And so on my reserve, the houses were falling apart because it was made from very cheap material that would deteriorate very quickly. And I also live in a remote community, and seeing how the transportation issue of certain materials was an issue. That was my driving point for architecture. And it was actually, I would write it in all of my like scholarship applications, my application to get into architecture school. I would write like, I want to help First Nations communities with their housing issues. But then over time, I wanted to think about stuff that were bigger. And so I didn't really think of myself designing like single family homes. I wanted something as big as the Hudson's Bay building. I wanted something like larger that had a bigger impact, and was able to be seen by more people. And so over time, it started to get more modern, and larger and bigger, and then my dreams just got even bigger than that. And so obviously I don't see myself designing a skyscraper because that's crazy. But like I think I'll be okay with the Hudson's Bay building for now. But yeah, to answer your question, it has turned modern. And then also in the case of this house, I think it's not it was a goal, but a different kind of goal. I always struggled. My family really struggles financially. So I grew up moving houses and like living in basements and seeing like how the finances really made my family really stressed. And so the also goal was within my education was to be able to live and find a house like this. And so me and my husband now, he is actually a lawyer. And so he had that dream as well. And so we really tried to do this for our children. And this guy is like laughing, looking outside the window.
Right on, thank you. And I think too, like as a parent as well, I have a 10-month-old son, so I can really relate. He's sleeping upstairs, so I'm actually just waiting for that little tornado to come downstairs too. So I can really relate to that. But it's really and I think growing up in some of the housing and growing up in my nation, things like that too, it really played a big role in what I seen myself living in when I had that opportunity. Obviously, our parents do what they can, but as an adult as well, I can really say that I really enjoy living in a beautiful home. Also, so yeah, no, I just think it's so awesome. And my other question would be, how competitive is architectural design? So I'm sure, there's quite a few competitors out there. I would assume that it's more niche in terms of other First Nations competitors, but in the field itself, like how competitive is it? And is competition something that you thrive off of, or is that something that is kind of intimidating at times as well?
It is very competitive. And so just to explain like how you get a project, traditionally it's you go through a proposal process. And so they put out through that functional programming with that project management company, they put out what they call a request for proposal. And so you respond to that. And so usually all these firms are trying to put together teams. Oh my goodness, crazy. Um, and they're trying to make the best team, and you're pretty much in. Stop. Well, come here then. 1 second. These are my twins. But yeah, they're really in competition with one another, and so it is a very competitive field. But I'm a little. I'm a little cocky. I kind of like, yeah, I'm gonna get this is the type of mentality that I have. Like I'm good. I'm gonna get this. I have enough connections. And so that's usually the mentality that I have. I'm not usually like in concern of what's projects I get or don't get. And in terms of the First Nations, like Indigenous architecture realm, it's it's very competitive. You're kind of in competition with your friends. Uh, and so it's pretty hard in that type, but none of us really let it get to one another.
Right on. Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions that you might want to ask?
See, hi.
Again, I think we're in a very cool opportunity that we might not always get. I expressed that through some of these virtual events, conferences, things like that. It's conference season as well. So, and our people are always scared to ask a wrong question or a silly question, but really, it's just we're all in a place to learn. So, if there are no questions, then I guess we can kind of wrap things up. We are at about the 50-minute mark, so it's been a lot of great information has been shared. So yeah, if there's no more questions, I guess we'll kind of wrap things up. We do want to thank the Starbucks Foundation for funding our Youth Connect opportunities, and so without their support, obviously we couldn't bring in awesome facilitators and presenters like yourself. But nonetheless, I really think can do as well. I think it's good to highlight the ladies here for their hard work as well, and obviously to our presenter for today. So, with that being said, for the ones that have attended as a participant, we do encourage you once again to fill out the final evaluation, and you are entered into a $100 gift card um, draw when you fill out those evaluations. So I really want to thank these little guys too for that's my son as well. He's always clapping, always happy and smiling. And but yeah, thank you again there, Reanna. We really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. And with that, I guess we'll kind of close things out. So likewise to everyone else, have a great rest of your day and stay warm if it's a little chilly where you're at. So yeah, thank you guys. And again, thank you, Candu, for hosting this event session. Yeah,
Thank you so
have a great rest
much.
of your day.
Hey there, boy. Hey there.